The gavel slipped from Maverick Hollowell's weathered fingers as he watched the woman collapse onto the dusty auction platform. The crowd of bidders fell silent, their voices dying mid-shout as her delicate frame crumpled like a discarded wildflower. She'd been standing there for what felt like hours, chin raised defiantly, despite the rope binding her wrists, her emerald eyes blazing with fury that could set the entire prairie ablaze. Lot 17, Miss Cordelia Voss, indentured for debts. Ode, the auctioneer had announced, but Maverick barely heard the words. All he could see was the way she trembled despite her brave facade, the way her midnight black hair caught the afternoon sun streaming through the barn doors. Now she lay motionless on the wooden boards, and something primal roared to life in Maverick's chest. He vaulted over the bidding rail with surprising agility for a man of his size, his boots thundering against the platform as he shouldered past the confused auctioneer. "Get back, Hollowell," Sheriff Bramwell barked. But Maverick was already kneeling beside her, his calloused hands hovering uncertainly over her pale face. Up close, he could see the purple shadows under her eyes, the hollow curve of her cheeks. That spoke of too many missed meals. "When did she last eat?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. The auctioneer shuffled his papers nervously. "That ain't your concern unless you're the highest bidder. I'm bidding." Maverick's words rang out clear and final. $500. Gasps echoed through the barn. It was more money than most folks in Willowbrook Creek saw in 2 years. The rival bidder's old Jeremiah Crenshaw, who'd been eyeing Cordelia with predatory interest, and the widow Pennyworth, who needed kitchen help, fell silent. 500 going once, ... The auctioneer stammered. Cordelia's eyelids fluttered open, revealing those stunning green eyes that had haunted Maverick's thoughts since she'd been brought to town 3 days ago. Her gaze found his face hovering above her, and instead of gratitude, he saw pure, undiluted rage. "Don't," she whispered, her voice hoarse but fierce. "Don't you dare buy me like livestock. Going twice, ... Maverick felt something crack open in his chest as he stared down at her. This wasn't how he'd planned it. He'd come to the auction intending to bid on farming equipment, maybe some breeding stock. He sure as hell hadn't planned to lose his mind over a woman being sold to pay her dead father's gambling debts. "You got a better option, sweetheart?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. Her jaw clenched, and he watched her scan the crowd. Crenshaw, licking his lips like a hungry wolf. The widow Pennyworth counting coins with skeletal fingers, a handful. Of drifters who looked like they'd work her to death in their Dust Bowl farms, sold to Maverick Hollowell. The gavel fell with finality, but Maverick wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the single tear that traced down Cordelia's cheek as she turned her face away from him, wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. The buckboard bounced along the rutted trail toward the rocking H Ranch, and Cordelia Voss sat rigid as a fence post beside her new owner. The ropes had been cut from her wrists, but invisible chains felt heavier than iron around her heart. She'd watched her childhood home get auctioned off piece by piece over the past week. Her mother's china, her father's books, even the rocking chair where she'd learned to read. Now she was the final lot, sold like a prize heifer to a man she'd never spoken to before today. Maverick Hollowell kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, but she could feel him stealing glances at her every few minutes. His hands gripped the reins with controlled strength, and she noticed how gentle he'd been when helping her into the wagon despite her furious protests. Most men would have simply hoisted her up like a sack of grain. "You planning to tell me what you expect from me, or do I have to guess?" she finally asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. He was quiet for so long she thought he might ignore her completely. Then he pulled the buckboard to a stop beside a creek lined with cottonwoods, their leaves whispering secrets in the evening breeze. "I expect you to eat regular meals and get some color back in your cheeks," he said finally. "Expect you to rest until you stop looking like a strong wind might blow you clean to Kansas." Cordelia blinked, thrown off balance by his unexpected response. "And then we'll figure out the rest." He climbed down and walked around to her side of the wagon, extending his hand. "Come on, creek's got good water, and you look like you could use a drink." She ignored his offered hand and climbed down herself, her legs wobbling slightly from weakness and pride in equal measure. The water was indeed sweet and cold, and she had to force herself not to drink too greedily. When she looked up, Maverick was leaning against a tree trunk, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Why?" she asked abruptly. "Why bid on me?" His jaw worked silently for a moment. She saw something raw and unguarded flicker across his features before he shuddered it away. Because Crenshaw was going to win, and that old bastard's buried 3 wives already. Because the widow Pennyworth would have worked you to death scrubbing her floors. Because ... trailed off, shaking his head. Because what? Cordelia pressed, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to keep her distance. Because when I looked at you up there, something inside me just ... broke. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her, like seeing a wild mustang in a too small corral. He'd flared in Cordelia's cheeks, part anger, part something else she didn't want to name. "I'm not a horse that needs rescuing, no," he agreed quietly. "You're something much more dangerous." The words hung between them like a challenge, charged with possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. Cordelia felt her carefully constructed walls waver, and that terrified her more than being sold at auction ever had. A coyote howled in the distance, and Maverick pushed away from the tree. "We should get moving. Ranch is still another hour out, and Minerva will have my hide if I don't get you fed before dark." Minerva, my housekeeper. "She's got opinions about proper treatment of guests." His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile, and she's got the rolling pin to back them up. Despite everything, Cordelia felt her lips twitch in response. Maybe, just maybe, she'd landed in a situation that wouldn't destroy what was left of her spirit after all. Minerva Thistlebottom turned out to be a force of nature. Wrapped in gingham and armed with the largest wooden spoon Cordelia had ever seen. The moment Maverick's buckboard rolled up to the sprawling ranch house, the housekeeper came bustling out with the efficiency of a general marshalling troops. "Maverick Hollowell, what in tarnation took you so long?" She scolded, but her sharp eyes were already assessing Cordelia with the keen attention of someone used to nursing wounded creatures back to health. "Lord have mercy, child. You're nothing but skin and bones." Before Cordelia could protest, she found herself swept into the warm kitchen, installed at a scrubbed pine table, and presented with a bowl of beef stew that smelled like heaven itself. Her stomach cramped with desperate hunger, but years of finishing school training made her lift the spoon with careful dignity. "Oh, for Pete's sake," Minerva muttered, ladling another generous portion into the bowl. "Eat like you mean it, honey. Ain't nobody here gonna judge you for having an appetite." Maverick had disappeared to tend his horses, leaving the 2 women alone in the lamplit kitchen. Cordelia found herself relaxing slightly under Minerva's maternal fussing, though she kept her guard firmly in place. "He's not what I expected," she admitted quietly after her 3rd helping of stew. Minerva's weathered hand stilled as she kneaded tomorrow's bread. "What were you expecting?" Someone who'd... Cordelia struggled for words that wouldn't reveal. "Too much. Someone who'd make demands immediately. Maverick ain't that kind of man." Minerva's voice carried a fierce protectiveness. "He's been running this ranch since he was barely 18 after his PA died. He could have married any number of suitable girls, but he's been waiting for something special, something real." The implication, in her words, made Cordelia's cheeks burn. "I'm not here by choice, Miss Minerva. I'm indentured to pay my father's debts. Are you now?" The older woman's eyes twinkled with something that looked suspiciously like mischief. "Ain't. Funny thing about debts, sometimes they got a way of disappearing when the right person takes an interest." Before Cordelia could ask what she meant, the kitchen door opened and Maverick stepped inside, bringing the scent of leather and prairie wind with him. He'd washed up at the pump outside, his dark hair still damp and curling slightly at the collar. When his eyes met hers across the kitchen, something electric passed between them that made her pulse quicken. "Minerva's got you settled in, I see." His voice was carefully neutral, but she noticed how his gaze lingered on her face, as if memorizing every detail. "She's been very kind." Cordelia set down her spoon, suddenly self-conscious about how much she'd eaten. "I should ask, what are my duties here? What work do you need me to do?" Maverick and Minerva exchanged a look that spoke of an entire conversation Cordelia wasn't privy to. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "Tonight you rest. Minerva's made up the guest room for eucalyne sheets, hot water for washing, everything else." Can wait until you're stronger. It was another kindness she hadn't expected, and it left her feeling off balance and vulnerable. Mr. Hollowell, I need to understand what you expect from me. The uncertainty is ... difficult. He studied her for a long moment, then pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, more intimate with his presence filling the space between them. What I expect, he said slowly, is for you to heal. To remember what it feels like to sleep without worry, to eat without counting every bite, to make choices because you want to, not because you have to. His eyes never left hers. What I expect, Miss Voss, is for you to find yourself again. Cordelia's breath caught in her throat. No one had spoken to her like that since her mother died, as if she were precious, worth protecting, worth more than the sum of her debts and obligations. And after that, she whispered. Maverick's smile was soft and devastating. After that, we'll see what you choose to do with your freedom. 3 weeks into her stay at the Rocking H, Cordelia discovered that freedom was far more complicated than she'd imagined. She'd gained weight under Minerva's determined care, her cheeks now holding a healthy rose color that made her green eyes sparkle with renewed life. Her strength had returned along with her curves. But with physical recovery came an emotional awakening she hadn't anticipated. Maverick Hollowell was nothing like the rough rancher she'd known growing up. He read books, real books with poetry, and philosophy, and could discuss everything from Shakespeare to cattle breeding with equal intelligence. He treated his ranch hands with respect, paid them fair wages, never raised his voice, even when prize bulls escaped their enclosures. More dangerously, he treated her like a guest rather than an indentured servant, asking her opinions on everything, from the color of new curtains to improvements for the ranch buildings. When she'd shyly mentioned missing her father's piano, he'd ridden into town and returned with an upright that had seen better days, but still held a sweet, mellow tone. Now, she sat at that piano in the front parlor, her fingers dancing across keys that sang with memories of better times. The music had drawn Maverick from his evening paperwork. She could feel him watching from the doorway as she played a Chopin nocturne her mother had taught her years ago. That's beautiful, he said softly when the last notes faded into the lamplight. Cordelia's hand stilled on the keys. My mother said music was the language of the heart, that when words failed, melody could bridge any distance between souls. A smart woman. Maverick moved into the room, his boots silent on the Persian rug. Do you miss her terribly, every day? Cordelia turned on the piano bench to face him, surprised by how natural it felt to share such personal thoughts with him. She died when I was 16. Consumption. After that, it was just Papa and me, and he. He wasn't the same man without her. Understanding flickered in Maverick's dark eyes. Grief does strange things to people, makes them run toward things that promise to numb the pain. The gambling, Cordelia said quietly. It started small, just friendly games with neighbors. But after Mama died, it became his way of forgetting. By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, we'd lost almost everything. Maverick settled into the chair closest to the piano, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. What about you? How did you cope with losing her? I threw myself into keeping house, managing Papa's affairs, trying to hold everything together. A bitter laugh escaped her. I thought if I just worked hard enough, was perfect enough, I could somehow keep our world from falling apart. But worlds fall apart anyway sometimes, Maverick said gently, no matter how hard we try to hold them together. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. You sound like you speak from experience. He was quiet for so long. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then he leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, his hands clasped loosely between them. My PA built this ranch from nothing, he said finally. Worked himself to death trying to prove he could make something lasting in this harsh country. When I was 17, I watched him collapse in the north pasture during a blizzard. 3 days to find his body. Cordelia's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. Without thinking, she reached out and covered his hands with her own. I'm so sorry. His eyes met hers, and the gratitude she saw there took her breath away. I spent the next 5 years working just as hard as he did, thinking if I could just Make the ranch successful enough, it would somehow honor his sacrifice. But success without someone to share it with. He shook his head. It's just another kind of emptiness. The admission hung between them, raw and honest, and Cordelia felt her carefully guarded heart crack open just a little wider. Here was a man who understood loss, who'd learned the same hard lessons about love and grief and the courage it took to risk caring again. Maverick, she whispered, his name feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. Yes, thank you. For seeing me is more than just another debt to be paid. His hands turned under hers, capturing her fingers gently. Cordelia, you were never just a debt. From the moment I saw you on that auction platform, you were something else entirely. What was I? She asked, her pulse racing at the tender way he spoke her name. His thumb traced across her knuckles, sending shivers up her arm. You were the answer to a question I'd been afraid to ask. The spring storm hit the rocking H with the fury of a woman scorned, driving sheets of rain against the windows and turning the ranch yard into a muddy lake. Cordelia stood at the kitchen window, watching lightning split the purple sky. When she spotted Maverick and his men struggling to move the horses to higher ground. Without thinking, she grabbed her shawl and headed for the door. Don't you dare go out in that weather. Minerva called after her, but Cordelia was already running across the yard. Her skirts plastering against her legs as the wind tried to knock her sideways. She reached the stable just as Maverick led the last of the mares inside, his shirt transparent, with rain and his dark hair streaming water down his face. When he saw her standing in the doorway, soaked to the skin but safe, something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. What the hell are you doing out here? He strode toward her, his hands already reaching to check for injuries. You could have been struck by lightning, or trampled, or I was worried about you. She interrupted, her own temper flaring to match his. I saw you out there in this storm and I couldn't just stand inside sipping tea while you risked your life. So you decided to risk yours instead. His hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing water from her cheeks. Damn it, Cordelia, what were you thinking? I was thinking that The words caught in her throat as she realized what she'd been about to say, that she loved him. That the thought of losing him terrified her more than any storm ever could. That somewhere between the piano lessons and shared meals and late-night conversations about books and dreams, he'd become essential to her happiness. What? He demanded softly, his face inches from hers. What were you thinking? Thunder crashed overhead, and the stable lanterns flickered as if the very air around them was charged with electricity. Cordelia stared up into his eyes and saw her own desperate feelings reflected there, the longing, the fear, the hope that maybe, just maybe, love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances. I was thinking that I can't bear the thought of losing you, she whispered. The admission seemed to break something loose inside him. His mouth came down on hers with a hunger that stole her breath, a kiss that tasted of rain and promises and everything she'd been afraid to want. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, and she felt him groan against her lips, as if her touch was both salvation and torment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Maverick rested his forehead against hers. Cordelia, he said roughly, there's something you need to know. What? She asked, though part of her didn't want to hear whatever might shatter this perfect moment. Your father's debt, Ty paid it off the day after the auction? She went very still in his arms. What are you saying? I'm saying you've been free to leave this ranch for weeks. The indenture papers were just for show, to give you time to decide what you really wanted. His hands tightened on her waist. I kept meaning to tell you, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Her voice was barely audible above the storm. Afraid you'd leave before I could show you how much I need you. How empty this place was before you filled it with music and laughter and life. He cupped her face again, his eyes searching hers desperately. I know I had no right to deceive you, even with good intentions. But I fell in love with you the moment you looked at me with those defiant eyes on the auction platform. And she silenced him with another kiss, this one softer but no less consuming. When she pulled back, she saw hope warring with fear. In his expression, you impossible, wonderful man, she breathed. Do you really think I would have stayed all these weeks? Shared all those dinners and conversations and piano duets if I didn't want to be here? I hoped, he admitted. I'd hope. And certainty are different things. Then let me give you certainty. She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I love you, Maverick Hollowell. I love your gentle strength and your generous heart and the way you see the best in everything around you. I love this ranch and this life and the future I can imagine building here with you. Relief and joy transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. Does that mean you'll stay? Not because you have to, but because you choose to. I choose to stay, she said firmly. Now. And always. Outside, the storm began to ease, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy sealing their promises with kisses that spoke of forever. The wedding planning consumed the entire month of June. Though not in any way Cordelia could have anticipated, Minerva had appointed herself chief coordinator, turning the ranch house into a battlefield of fabric swatches, menu cards, and enough floral arrangements to stock 3 churches. Meanwhile, the entire population of Willowbrook Creek seemed determined to contribute their opinions on everything from the color of the bridesmaids, dresses to the proper number of layers for the wedding cake. If one more person tells me what flowers I should carry, I'm going to elope, Cordelia muttered, collapsing into Maverick's arms as he found her hiding in the barn. After a particularly intense discussion with the preacher's wife about proper wedding etiquette, "Don't tempt me," he murmured against her hair, his hands running soothingly up and down her back. "I've been dreaming about riding off into the sunset with you for weeks now. And Miss Minerva's 7-course reception dinner, she'd never forgive? Us." Cordelia tilted her head back to look at him, marveling at how his presence could calm her frayed nerves instantly. "Besides, I want everyone to see how happy we are. I want the whole world to know that Maverick Hollowell chose me, and I chose him right back." His smile was soft and devastating. "Even when I'm covered in dust and smell like cattle? Especially then?" She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him properly, tasting sunshine and contentment on his lips. "Up nice, too. Speaking of which," he said, pulling back reluctantly, "I have something for you." From his shirt pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box that made Cordelia's heart skip several beats. Inside nestled a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen. Not the typical diamond solitaire, but an intricate band of white gold set with emeralds the exact color of her eyes, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly, watching her face as she stared at the ring in wonder. "Pa gave it to her when they got engaged. But she had the stones reset because she said traditional rings were for traditional love stories. She wanted something as unique as what they'd found together." Tears blurred Cordelia's vision as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered. "It looks right on your hand," Maverick said, his thumb tracing the ring's delicate setting. "Like it was always meant to be yours, just like I was always meant to be yours. And I was always meant to be yours." He kissed her forehead then, her cheeks, then her mouth with tender reverence. 2 weeks from tomorrow, Mrs. Hollowell." The name sent delicious shivers through her entire body. 2 weeks from tomorrow, she agreed. Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Cordelia looked out to see a familiar figure dismounting near the house, and her blood turned to ice in her veins. "What is it?" Maverick asked, following her gaze. "It's Jeremiah Crenshaw," she said quietly. "What could he possibly want here?" Maverick's jaw tightened as he watched the older man stride toward the front porch with obvious purpose. "I don't know, but I intend to find out. Stay here, like hell I will." Cordelia caught his arm. "Whatever he wants, it concerns me too. We face it together." He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him she wouldn't back down. Together, they walked toward the house, where Crenshaw was already pounding on the front door with his walking stick. "Hollowell," the old man called out. "I know you're here. We need to talk." Maverick stepped onto the porch, positioning himself slightly in front of Cordelia. "What do you want, Crenshaw?" The older man's eyes were bright with malicious triumph. "I want what's rightfully mine." That girl you stole from me at the auction, turns out her father owed me money too. Money that comes due tomorrow with interest. Cordelia felt the world tilt sideways. That's impossible, Papa never mentioned. Your papa owed money to half the county, girlie. Crenshaw's smile was ugly. Gambling debts got a way of multiplying when a man dies before paying them. According to the law, his debts pass to his next of kin. She's marrying me in 2 weeks. Maverick said dangerously. Any debts she inherited will be my responsibility then, but not before. Crenshaw pulled out a legal document with obvious satisfaction. $5,000, Hollowell. Due tomorrow at noon. If she can't pay, she comes to work for me instead. $5,000? It might as well have been $5 million. Even Maverick, successful as he was, couldn't raise that kind of cash. Overnight, Cordelia felt her carefully rebuilt world crumbling around her once again. But this time, she wasn't facing the storm alone. Maverick's hand found hers, warm and steady, and she drew strength from his unwavering presence. We'll find a way, he said quietly, for her ears alone. But as Crenshaw rode away, whistling smugly, Cordelia wondered if love would be enough too. Overcome the ghosts of her father's mistakes one more time. The solution came from the most unexpected source. Cordelia had spent a sleepless night pacing her room, calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to salvation. Maverick could mortgage the ranch, but not quickly enough. They could ask the bank for an emergency loan, but Crenshaw had friends there who would ensure the paperwork moved slowly. Every option led to the same devastating conclusion. She would have to go with Crenshaw to honor her father's debt, leaving behind the only happiness she'd ever known. She was sitting at the kitchen table with untouched coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of heartbreak, when Minerva bustled in carrying a carpet bag that looked older than Moses. "Drink your coffee, child," the housekeeper said briskly, setting the bag on the table with a decisive thump. "We've got business to conduct. Minerva, if you're thinking of lending money, hush." The older woman opened the carpet bag, revealing neat stacks of bills and a collection of jewelry that made Cordelia's eyes widen. 40 years I've been working for the Hollowell family, and 40 years I've been saving every penny I could. Never had much use for finery or fancy things." "I can't take your life savings," Cordelia protested, even as hope bloomed treacherously in her chest. "You're not taking anything. You're accepting a wedding gift." Minerva's voice brooked no argument. "Besides, what good is money if you can't use it to protect the people you love?" Tears blurred Cordelia's vision as she stared at the woman who'd become more mother than housekeeper to her. Minerva, ... Don't you go getting weepy on me now. We've got to count this money and make sure it's enough to shut Crenshaw up for good. We're still counting when Maverick appeared in the doorway, his hair mussed from sleep and his face creased with worry. His expression shifted to bewilderment as he took in the scene before him. "Minerva, what? Your bride is buying her freedom," the housekeeper announced with satisfaction. "And we've got exactly $5,327. It's more than enough to send that old buzzard packing." Maverick's gaze moved between the two women, his expression cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally, profound gratitude. He crossed to Minerva and kissed her weathered cheek with gentle reverence. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he said softly. "How can we ever repay you?" "Give me grandbabies to spoil and die knowing I helped love triumph over greed," she replied, tartly, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "That's payment enough." 2 hours later, they met Crenshaw at the bank, with the money counted and witnessed. The old man's face went through several interesting color changes as he realized his scheme had failed. But he had no choice but to accept payment and sign the documents releasing Cordelia from all claims. "This isn't over," he muttered as he pocketed the money. "Yes, it is," Maverick said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "And if you ever threaten my family again, you'll answer to me." Crenshaw left town that same day. Cordelia never saw him again. The wedding took place exactly 2 weeks later, just as planned. Cordelia walked down the aisle of Willowbrook Creek's little white church in her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by Minerva's skillful hands. The entire town turned out to witness the ceremony, their faces beaming with the joy that comes from seeing love triumph over adversity. When Maverick lifted her veil and smiled at her with such tenderness that her heart nearly stopped, Cordelia knew that every hardship, every moment of despair, every fear she'd endured had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. "I love you, Mrs. Hollowell," he whispered against her lips as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. "I love you too," she whispered back, "now and always." 5 years later, as Cordelia sat on the porch swing, watching Maverick teach their twin daughters how to ride their gentle ponies, she reflected on the strange turns life could take. The woman who'd been sold at auction like livestock was now the heart of a thriving ranch, beloved wife and mother, a pillar of their growing community. Sometimes the greatest love stories began with the deepest despair. Sometimes salvation came not in the form you expected, but in the exact form you needed. And sometimes, when a rancher dropped his gavel to pick up a broken woman from an auction floor, he was really picking up his entire future and hers. The sound of childish laughter and Maverick's gentle voice drifted across the yard, and Cordelia smiled as she placed her hands on her growing belly where their third child nestled safely. Their love story had begun with an act of rescue, but it continued every day as they chose each other again and again, building something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of their separate sorrows. In the end, that was what love truly was, not just a feeling, but a choice. The choice to see worth in someone the world had discarded. The choice to offer kindness when hardness would be easier. The choice to build a future together, one day at a time, with courage and hope and unshakable faith in what two hearts could accomplish when they beat as one, and they all lived happily, thoroughly, completely ever after.